Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 patch 2.6.4 Season 16 Demon Hunter build guide. Season 16 will be kicking off January 18th, and the starter set for Demon Hunter is Natalya's. So what we're presenting here is the N6M4 build, which is not a new build, but it's newly buffed to become one of the most powerful builds in the game. The N6M4 build combines the full strength of the Natalya set with the partial strength of the Marauder set to transform your character into a ballista siege weapon commander. And in this video, we'll cover the skills, the gear, and the playstyle that you need to rock this build. Starting with the gear overview, you're going to want to benefit from the full 6-piece bonus of the Natalya set, which we'll achieve by having 5 pieces. Season 16 is the Season of Grandeur, meaning everyone gets the bonus of the Ring of Royal Grandeur for free. And if you're running this off-season or in a different season, then you'll want to pop in your cube a Ring of Royal Grandeur, simple as that. The 2-piece bonus of Natalya reduces the cooldown on Rain of Vengeance whenever you hit with an attack. Rain of Vengeance is a skill with a 30-second cooldown, and we'll want to be popping it at least once every 10 seconds, so this bonus is very important. The 4-piece bonus makes Rain of Vengeance deal more damage, but that's not super important to us. What is important is the 6-piece bonus, which makes it such that after casting Rain of Vengeance, you deal a ton more damage for 10 seconds. And you also take reduced damage. Now, this is the reason that we want to be renewing this buff at least once every 10 seconds. Now, apart from that, our actual damage source will not be Rain of Vengeance, and that's where the Marauder set kicks in. So we want 4 pieces of Marauders, which we'll achieve by equipping 3 pieces of Marauders. The 2-piece bonus grants us every single companion, but most importantly, the 4-piece set bonus makes sentries deal a bunch more damage and cast certain key skills at the same time that you cast them. And this brings us to our critical difference between the N6M4 build and just a standard Marauder build. Both builds revolve around deploying sentries, but in the Marauder build, the sentries buff your damage. In N6M4, you're buffing your sentries damage, so your source of damage is actually your sentries. And in this case, we're going to have them casting Cluster Arrow. So the general playstyle here will be deploying sentries in such a way that they're going to be hitting enemies, whereas we just sort of stay out of danger, keep our distance, and we have to actually fire Cluster Arrow to get our sentries to fire, and we need to keep up our hatred. Now, because this is a sentry build, we will want Bombardier's Rucksack. This gives us 2 more sentries for a total of 5. More sentries, more damage. We're going to toss in the Endless Walk set for more situational damage and toughness. We'll want Wraps of Clarity for a nice defensive buff every time we attack with our generator. And we're going to want Zoe's Secret Belt in order to further buff our toughness, because we're going to have every companion deployed. In our cube, we'll want the Manticore. This turbo buffs our Cluster Arrow. We're going to go with the Cinder Coat in the armor slot because we're going to go with the fire variant of Cluster Arrow. That said, if you happen to run with the cold variant, you'll want Frostburns in there instead. And you could run with the cold variant specifically if you happen to get cold gear. That's a lot better than your fire gear. For your jewelry slot, right now I have the Ring of Royal Grandeur because I'm recording this outside of the season, outside of the PTR, so I'm not benefiting from the Season 16 buff. But what you'll want to put here is a convention of elements. This is going to give us a lot more damage. But of course, you'll want to work around the convention of elements damage rotation window. So whenever the fire rotation comes up, or your element of choice, you want to ensure that you're at enough resource to spam damage throughout the entire window. Now, as for exactly how you divide up your set pieces, doesn't matter, except for the fact that for your shoulders, you need to get Marauder's Spines because Natalya does not have any shoulder pieces. You need to get Natalya's Ring, and you need to get Natalya's one-handed crossbow. Outside of that, just ensure you have a total of 5 Natalya pieces and 3 Marauder pieces. Now, before we go over the ideal stats you want on every piece of gear, let's first take a look at our skills. First off, you want to take Companion, and the rune doesn't matter because Marauder gives you access to every single rune. Now, whenever you pop the active effect of your Companion skill, you'll benefit from the following. From Spider Companion, you're going to slow enemies. Your Bat Companion will restore Hatred, serving as a mini Hatred potion. Your Boar Companion will pull some aggro off you. Your Ferret Companion will instantly pick up any health globes in the area, so if you're low on health and you can't pick it up yourself, then they should heal you in that sense. And your Wolf Companion gives you a small damage buff. So with a 30-second cooldown, Companion is a skill that you do want to be making use of as much as possible whenever you feel you need it. Whether it's the added damage from Wolf Companion, or whether you feel you're about to die and you need to pull aggro off you and need to slow enemies and need to heal, or whether it's just you want to pop more hatred to benefit from your convention window, do make sure that you're using Companion and it's not just passively occupying a slot on your hotbar. Our main attack skill will be Cluster Arrow, loaded for Bear. This is arguably the best damage rune for Cluster Arrow, and what's important to note here is that if you're considering using the Hellcat Waist Guard, which buffs the damage of grenades, that does not affect your sentries, so that's why we wouldn't take cluster bombs, for instance. Next, we'll want to take Rain of Vengeance, Flying Strike. Rain of Vengeance is not a very significant source of damage with this build, so we're taking the Flying Strike Cold rune to apply a crowd control effect to our enemies to benefit both from the crowd control and because of the damage multipliers we will have against crowd controlled enemies via our legendary gems and passives. So while you want to ensure that you cast this at least once every 10 seconds, you also want to be specifically targeting the enemies that you want to kill. Next, we'll want to take Sentry Polar Station. Once again, we're going with Cold to benefit from the crowd control. And note that any buff that requires you to be far away from enemies literally means you and not your sentries. So your sentries could be right up near the enemy, but still benefit from you being a screen's distance away for purposes of Zay's Stone of Vengeance or other effects. So as you are deploying your sentries, you want to make sure that you're trying to position them such that their areas are not overlapping. You want as much map coverage as possible. Try to catch enemies within the area and predict where enemies will be moving towards you and lay sentries in that path. Not only do you want to have your full sentries deployed at all times to do your max possible damage, but you also want to ensure that you are repositioning them whenever they end up off screen. You're sort of hopscotching forward with your sentries. Next, we're taking as a generator Evasive Fire Focus. It generates a solid amount of hatred while also shooting out in a shotgun pattern that makes it easy to strike a target. And lastly, we're taking Vault Trail of Cinders. We're only taking Trail of Cinders if we are using a Cinder Code, which reduces the resource cost of fire skills, and that applies to Vault. That said, if you are not going with a fire build, if you're not using Cinder Code, then you would go with Vault Tumble. For your passives, very important, custom engineering. This is what enables us to get our full maximum of 5 sentries. We'll want to take Cull the Weak for 20% more damage against all these chilled enemies. We'll want to get Steady Aim for a nice damage buff. Again, as long as enemies are not within 10 yards of you, and 10 yards is about this distance here to the perimeter of the waypoint, so it's really not far at all. And it should be easy enough to keep enemies at least that far away from you. Then we'll also want to get Single Out. This helps out with our single target DPS. But that said, if you're going with the cold variant, rather than Single Out, you would benefit more from Ballistics, because the Wind Chill rune on Cluster Arrow launches rockets. So again, that playstyle, you're going to walk into a new map because every time you zone into a new area, all of your sentries reset. You're going to start deploying your sentries immediately. Use up your 3 charges such that you can start building up the cooldown for the other charges, because you want to get your max 5 deployed. Then you're going to be popping Evasive Fire at least once every 5 seconds to maintain your defensive buff, and to recoup resource, you're going to be spamming Cluster Arrow for damage, trying to time it for your damage window, but not before you've popped your Rain of Vengeance, which again, at least once every 10 seconds to maintain your defensive and offensive buffs. You're going to pop Companion when you need it, particularly in those more difficult fights, but again, just make sure you're making use of it. You're going to Vault when needed, and that's basically it. Remember to keep enemies within your sentries and keep yourself as far away as possible. Because going back to our gear here, we're going to want a Zay's Stone of Vengeance. You do more damage to enemies that are further away, and 50 yards is roughly half a screen's distance. So basically, in order to benefit from the full effect of Zay's, you want enemies to be just on the edge of your screen, just within view. We're going to combine this with the Bane of the Trapped, arguably the best gem in the game. We're doing a lot to crowd control our enemies, and this will buff our damage against them. And then the Enforcer gem, because sentries count as pets for purposes of the Enforcer. So that will buff your sentry damage. Now, as for the stats that you want on every piece of gear, we're going to list off exactly what you want on every piece of gear. My gear isn't fully optimized, but I have a link in the video description to the D3 planner showing your idealized gear. So for your shoulders, you're going to ideally want dexterity, resource cost reduction, area damage, and sentry damage. For your helm, ideally dexterity, crit chance, cluster arrow damage, and the gem in your cube should be a topaz for resource cost reduction. For your Traveler's Pledge, ideally you want fire, crit chance, crit damage, and a socket for your legendary gem. For your gloves, you want dexterity, crit chance, crit damage, and area damage. For your cloak, dexterity, vitality, and sentry damage. Then for the gems that you put in your cloak and pants, go for dex if you want more damage, that is emeralds, or go for diamonds if you want more toughness. And if you're pushing those higher GRs, you will want that toughness. For your Wraps of Clarity, fire, dex, vitality, crit chance. For your belt, dex, vitality, all resist, life percent. Armor is a suboptimal stat on a dexterity-based character because dexterity gives armor. So you really would rather life percent or all resist over armor. Now for your rings, your compass rose, and your Natalyas, you'll want ideally crit chance and crit damage to begin with, and then 2 other DPS stats, be it dexterity, be it raw damage, although the raw damage is only good if the item is ancient or primal. And you could also go with area damage. Now dexterity starts to become less important the higher in Paragon you go because you can pump so many Paragon points into dexterity. That's a general rule of gearing. The higher in Paragon you go, then the more able you are to swap out dexterity for a different damage stat, as long as you're swapping it out for a damage stat. For your pants, dexterity, vitality, all resist. For your boots, dexterity, vitality, all resist, cluster arrow damage. For your weapon, percent damage, dexterity, area damage, and attack speed. You're going to want to roll off the increases Rain of Vengeance damage that naturally comes with this weapon. Then for your Bombardier's Rucksack, ideally dexterity, attack speed, crit chance, area damage, sentry damage, and resource cost reduction. For your Paragon point priority, you'll want to cap your move speed at 25%, and this factors in your gear and your ferret companion. So passively, your ferrets give you 10% move speed, so you don't want to have more than 15% here. And again, if you have any other piece of gear that gives you move speed, don't waste extra move speed here because you want to dump everything else into dexterity. For offense, you want to dump into crit chance and crit damage such that you maintain your overall crit chance to crit damage ratio at 1 to 10. Then dump into attack speed and then cooldown. For your defenses, all resist, life, armor, life regen. And utility, start with resource cost reduction, then area damage, life per hit, and gold find. And that is going to wrap up this video. But do stay tuned for more Diablo guides and updates to the best builds of Season 16. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider becoming a Royal Raider on Patreon, where your support is immensely appreciated. We've got a variety of backer rewards, including behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.